You got it.
I should know, everyone, that the meeting is being recorded. All right, good to go.
Okay, yes, man. Okay, so these are the two organizations that I'm a member of, organizing with. Let me start time myself to make sure I don't go over. Hopefully, make sure I don't go over. Black Alliance for Peace and the Pan-African Community Action is a member of Black Alliance for Peace. So we're based in DC, Pan-African Community Action, but we are a Pan-African organization, which means our scope and what our intentions are go to African people, Black people around the world. You can see our website and Black Alliance for Peace website and Twitter handles underneath. For PACA, PACA DMV is actually our social media handle for also Instagram and Facebook. And for Black Alliance for Peace, Black Alliance for Peace is also on Facebook and Instagram, but that's just their Twitter handle down there on the website. Just first, in terms of the topic, I want to start off with two of PACA's tools of analysis that will inform this conversation, and that it's important for people to understand that African people, Black people in the U.S. are a domestic colony. It means that within the United States, the population, by and large, serves the wants and needs of those who are in power, and which are not the same as their own needs, our own needs. And this is particularly true for working class Black people in the United States. If we think about this, United States, and remember, it's important to remember it's a settler colony. United States, was formed by European settlers coming and breaking away from Britain and claiming this country as their own and displacing indigenous people and bringing enslaved African people here to work for them. And that same paradigm, what we refer to as settler colonialism in the United States is defined or upheld by three pillars, and that is white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And it's important to remember those things. And as a result of that, our core issue in this country is not racism. Many people will, you'll hear many movements referring to racial justice and equality and those types of things, and fighting discrimination and dealing with the hatred of other people against Black people or other peoples or white people against. But we say that the core issue is not what's in other people's heads, but it's a question of power and self-determination, control, not inclusion. It does not matter what a white person may think about me, or if they want to lynch me, that's their problem. If they have the power to lynch me, and that's the issue, then that becomes my problem. That's actually a quote from Kwame Ture. And then, so it's important to know about that. These are quotes. This is really Dr. King asserts this question of colonialism and us being a domestic colony is not just something we made up. It is an analysis around domestic colony or colonialism. Domestic colony is not just Dr. King, there's a whole bunch of other people, Robert Allen, so many people, it goes back. But then this, because people embrace Dr. King a lot, we decided to pull out these two quotes from Dr. King in the 1967, after the Civil Rights Movement tackled the bulk of Jim Crow laws and were left to grapple with root issues. Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his famous speech, "Where do we go from here?" A lot of people hear I Have a Dream and all these, but Dr. King was quite profound and did a lot of underrepresented speeches. In this, Dr. King articulated the evolving views on the more fundamental role of Black people in the U.S., arguing the problem, and this is a quote by Dr. King, that we face in the ghetto is not that the ghetto is a domestic colony that's constantly being drained without being replenished. You are always telling us to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, yet we are being robbed every day. Also, Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture, and also Charles V. Hamilton published their groundbreaking book, and we recommend that people get these books from our predecessors, Black Power and the Politics of Liberation. In that book, the authors argued, and there's a quote from the book, Black people stand as colonial subjects in relation to the white society. Thus, institutional racism has another name, colonialism. And so if we think about colonialism and what we learn about history, about colonialism in school, usually, and it's like thinking of us, we think that geography has a thing to do with it. There's a metropole, and then there's a colony, and the metropole or a mother country is oppressing, or in fact, they can even sterilize it from having the concept of oppression. Uh, and but the actual main thing about it is not the geographical relationship between the metropole and the colony. It is the power dynamics between them, and everything that defines the power dynamics of African people to the power structure in the U.S. is exactly identical to what defines a colony to the colonizer, the colonized to the colonizer. It's the exact same relationship in every way. Um, Now we're going to talk about the police, because we're dealing with the community control of police. Just like everything, police has a history, and we don't get to hear about the history of police too much in this country, but it helps us understand the role that they play today. The earliest form of the U.S. police, or the slave patrols, they started in the 1700s in the South Carolina legislature codes, and they maintained the discipline, caught runaways, and tried to prevent insurrections. This is the earliest form of police. In the North, later on, nearly a century later, or it's really a half a century, in the North and West, the police institutions evolved in response to a different set of race class contradictions. They originated as private security to protect the property class, to break up strikes, and to prevent worker protests in the working class. This is essentially the same relationship the police have today, but we don't think about them like that. We don't go to school. We don't hear about the history of police and how they formed or anything like. Everything has a history, and so this is what we have to understand in order to understand the nature, why the institution of police plays the role that it does against people of color, particularly working class. We want to stress that working class people, and even not even just working class people of color, working class people, period, face and poor people face some things about the face brutality at the hands of police. This goes into the reason why most people don't think of the police the way we do, is because of a concerted effort in the offices or the board rooms of public relations boardrooms of the police has propagated myths about the police to protect and serve and has erased that history before. Many people, I'm sure, probably too young to. Well, it depends. You might have some people on here that can remember Officer Bill and this whole thing. This is a clip from an earlier magazine or newspaper but the reality for people of color, particularly Black people and indigenous people, Native Americans or American Indian people, has been the opposite of what is propagated to us all the time. It's been like that we don't have to commit crimes or anything. The police are the purpose of them is to contain and control the disenfranchised, the disinherited or class of people, which in the United States is predominantly people of color, and the slave, and people who were brought here enslaved, and also the people who were dispossessed from their land. And so these are just a couple depictions to understand the different realities that we faced, and then what is propagated to us. In PACA, we actually do this exercise with people where we ask people to talk about what they learn about the police in schools and the media, and then just list the number of adjectives. And they come up with this nice list: brave and heroic and protectors and da-da-da. And then we stop them and say, and we're talking about people in the community because we're organizing in the community. Now list all the things that your experiences and people with the police. And they come up with a completely starkly different list of circumstances, and then we ask them. We get into a discussion of why it's so. Why are these lists so different? And it's a very interesting and revealing exercise to go. Now, in the United States, or even probably, I don't know what it's like in other television in other countries enough to know, but people knew. I mean, these are some of the earliest police shows. particularly Dragnet and Adam 12 were just really set, but all of them really set on trying to propagate things against people, the war on drugs and all this kind of stuff, the marijuana, the things about marijuana, different things. But the main thing that does is to glorify the role of the police as benevolent protectors, and that you have to obey the police, and what they do is ultimately good. And we get these shows and these types of programming in television and even internet or whatever all the time. It's it's never ending. So we're bombarded with this propaganda. So it's hard for people to imagine a community without a world without police. In fact, we have with this moment, people are talking about the abolition movement. You have to be really radical to kind of even hear about it or embrace that or wrap your mind around it. Defunding the police, abolish the police. This is why people can't, this propaganda is why people have a hard time looking at defunding the police. And you even had Obama just recently come out and say, oh, you don't want to talk about defunding the police and whatever Obama did recently. Now, this is a quote from Malcolm X that understands why things are so the way they are. Okay. The media is the most powerful entity on earth, and we have to remember this. The powers that be is not just the forces that they use to contain and control the masses, the physical forces through the police, and now militarized police. They militarize the police. Department of Defense is transferring military grade weaponry to police departments and through a program called 1033 program, and they've been doing this for a while. They've actually, the beginning of militarized police started a lot earlier than most people said, during SWAT, the Special Weapons and Tactics is team SWAT. They've even had movies about or television programs about SWAT. But the main thing is that the media is also an entity, and some refer to the media as the fourth branch of the government. News media, and we say news media or media in the broader sense of the word, not just news media, but the billboards and the television shows and the movies and Hollywood and all kind of things that we have to contend with. This is a book I recommend that people get. It's not very easy to find these days, whether you might find a free copy online, and it deals with the history and the very pervasive and extensive role of policing in this country, the iron fist and the velvet glove, and analysis of the U.S. police. And it was done in the 70s, but it's but I recommend people try to get it. I've seen copies online that they're selling, very scarce. But I think now, I don't know how many people, and sometimes I get concerned with the whether history is being lost or not, particularly when people controlling information, a tighter control of information. People need to know. And those of you who don't, and you don't get taught it in school very much, of the COINTEL program, the FBI's COINTEL program, started by J. Edgar Hoover. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program, and it targeted leaders like Dr. King. On the right, you'll see that's Fred Hampton, and it and railroaded people into prison and assassinated, worked with people to assassinate, infiltrated groups. They were only fighting for social justice. It wasn't about crime or anything, and just did a lot to destroy the movement. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to play a clip. I don't know how much from this from this documentary, COINTELPRO 101. Hopefully it will let me. Come on. Oh. Okay.
Is it letting you share?
Yes, just a minute. I had to queue up the thing because I wasn't ready. It didn't stay where I wanted it to stay.
Gotcha.
Here we go. People can see that?
Yes, sir.
In 1974, in Boulder, Colorado, during an upsurge in the Chicano student movement, 6 young activists were killed in 2 separate car bombings. They are called Los Seis de Boulder and are honored to this day.
We lost a lot of leadership and we lost a lot of potential. And beyond the individuals who died, the spirit kind of died there.
Although COINTELPRO was a federal program, the FBI and other federal agencies worked in close coordination with local police and encouraged right-wing vigilantes, launching joint attacks infiltrations, and surveillance. One example of this use of right-wing groups is the assassination of Ricardo Falcón, a promising young Chicano leader who sought to build greater unity.
He could move the people in the prisons. He could move the people in the barrios, and he could move the students. So to me, he was a real example of what was coming.
In 1972, a right-wing vigilante named Perry Brunson shot and killed 22-year-old Ricardo Falcón. Falcón was riding in a car with other activists to a Chicano political party convention in El Paso, Texas. When the car overheated, they stopped at a gas station in Oro Grande, New Mexico.
The owner of the gas station comes out and he says to the group, "You Chicano motherfuckers are all alike." And he walks back into the station. So Ricardo says to the group, "I'm going to go in and see what's going on with this guy and pay for the water." As he walks into the gas station, he opens the door. Perry Brunson's inside the counter, inside and in front of him is a counter. And he reaches into the counter and pulls out a .38 and shoots Ricardo 5 times. And so then Ricardo attempts to reach over and pull the gun from him. One of the gentlemen that's out in the car hears the gunshots. He runs in, and he then wrestles Perry Brunson to the ground for the gun. Ricardo has turned around and walked out of the gas station and then collapses, and he bleeds to death.
The man who assassinated Ricardo Falcón was an organizer for the American Independent Party. In his gas station, the day of Ricardo Falcón's murder, he had a petition there for people who wanted to sign to have George Wallace's name put on the ballot in New Mexico in November of 1972.
Brunson was acquitted by an all-white jury and never spent a day in jail. Supporters have attempted to obtain COINTELPRO documents about Ricardo Falcón.
I think that the activities that Ricardo Falcón was involved in, the organizing of students in Boulder, the bringing of the community together, the empowering of people in northern Colorado, I think are some of the key factors that led to his assassination in Oro Grande.
I participated in the trial. I saw some of the evidence, and I'm convinced that Ricardo Falcón, it was no coincidence that he was killed in Oro Grande.
Throughout all these years, I filed for his Freedom of Information files, and I have yet to receive one document from the government. They refuse to release any of the records concerning his Freedom of Information file.
Today, here we are looking at it some 30 years ago, 35 years ago, 40 years ago almost. And some of these things say, oh my God, how can you believe that those things could have ever happened? Well, I'll tell you what, the federal government thought they could have happened because they wouldn't have done some of the things that they did.
COINTELPRO targeted many movements and damaged people and organizations, from the Puerto Rican, Native American, and Chicano movements to the mostly white left, the huge anti-war movement, and student groups like Students for a Democratic Society. In many ways, these movements grew out of the energy and inspiration of the civil rights movement, first in the South and then throughout the country. It was the leaders of the civil rights and black liberation movements who J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI thought represented the greatest threat, had the most potential to bring unity to and transform the many movements into a force united and powerful enough to overthrow the established order. That was why COINTELPRO infamously included a list of black leaders to be neutralized. It was within this context that the assassinations of Malcolm X and then Martin Luther King Jr. took place. Massive rebellions took place in African American communities in many cities. As repression intensified, a more militant black liberation movement emerged. Vicious tactics, trumped-up charges, and calculated assassinations were unleashed against SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, against the Black Panther Party, and against RAM, the Revolutionary Action Movement.
Life magazine put out in June, I think, of 1966. The plot to get Whitey. All right. And it is stated that I was head of 1,000 blood brothers across the country that was planning to wage guerrilla warfare.
Of course, the Black Liberation Movement is a priority at that time because the Black Liberation Movement and the quote-unquote Black Rebellion in the country at that time was gaining some significant momentum.
COINTELPRO was a governmental conspiracy to liquidate the revolutionary leadership of Black America because we were impacting upon the whole country. And the leadership had to be liquidated even up to Dr. King, because Dr. King had changed.
People don't talk about it in those terms right now. We kind of equate and collapse everything into civil rights. But there was a more militant movement, a movement that was reaching out to global politics in terms of anti-imperialism at that particular moment, and it had tremendous potential.
The Black Panther Party was only a small manifestation of what this infrastructure wanted to do. I'm talking about SNCC. Came up with these brilliant ideas, you know, that had nothing to do with a Huey Newton or a Bobby Seale. We were organizing in the South, in the West, in the East, the symbol of the Panther from the Mississippi Freedom and Democratic Party, Fannie Lou Hamer, all these people I knew I'm growing up with, and we see.
If you're right, you have to stand on that principle, and if it's necessary to die on the principle, because I am sick of the racist war in Vietnam when we don't have justice in the United States.
The militant aspects it's already there from the deacons on. This is what you did. We grew up in a black nation, a nation that had to protect itself.
We are concerned about the survival of black people in this country, and that we cannot survive if we go fight some yellow man in Vietnam who ain't never called us nigger.
The government saw it as a black Marxist movement growing in the North. We were independent of the Communist Party. We were independent of the Socialist Workers' Party. We were independent of all left groups that they had already infiltrated. It was growing.
But you also had the Chicano movement developing, Asian American, anti-imperialist, national liberation consciousness type movement. In the Puerto Rican community, you had the development of that, as well as with white students and white youth in the formation of SDS and other radical white organizations in that moment. So, you know, in terms of the development of a different type of politics, it scared the hell out of the United States government at that particular moment. And that's why counterinsurgency was developed at that level.
In the past, the poor neighborhoods have been exploited by persons persons who have been less than American. There's so many of these anti-American, pink, even red organizations.
The FBI and the Department of Justice would learn everything about people in a particular organization. And they did that through wiretaps of telephones, of planting bugs in offices, and using informants.
The Red Squad, there are those units within the police department or any law enforcement unit that have as their function the investigating and looking into organizations that perhaps are a little on the suspect side or have revealed themselves in such a way as to be a little bit questionable.
Okay, thank you for indulging me on that. Let me close this so it doesn't interrupt us again. And so let me get back to my, a minute. All right. Sorry about that. Hold on. Gotta get back to my presentation. Where was I?
Oh, well,
You can hear me?
oh, sorry. Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. And then, so So that was a little bit about COINTELPRO. I hope people know about COINTELPRO. If not, please look at it. There's a lot of declassified documents that's come out, government documents showing it. COINTELPRO has resulted in a number of political prisoners. Our political prisoners in the U.S. do not get enough attention and support. People have been languishing in prison for like over 40 years, many of them. This is Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's like the most well-known political prisoner, but there are a number of others. And Leonard Peltier, who's an indigenous person. But then I don't want to focus so much on that. This is back to the police, but this is to talk about the role of these institutions, the police and then the military. This is also going back into what I said earlier, that racial prejudice is not the problem, but it's a problem of power. And so I'm going to skip through that. And again, I also mentioned the militarization of the police, which people are probably aware of. This is Assata Shakur, who's currently in exile, living in exile in Cuba. She was in the Black Liberation Army, Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, and she was railroaded also into prison, and they were able to get her out of prison, escape from prison in the 70s. People freed her and then got her to Cuba, where she's now living in exile. And even the U.S. still cynically is putting a bounty on her head. Now is the first woman, maybe the only one now, to be on the list of terrorists. She hasn't done anything terrorist, and she's been in Cuba for all these years, and they won't leave her alone. But she has this quote. She's very, and it's a book. Her autobiography is called Assata, and people should get that book. Nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of those who are oppressing them. And to me, this goes to the questions that we hear now. We hear demands for abolish and defunding the police. We don't disagree with. No one can argue that the police are their budgets are overbloated, and that there's a whole lot of human needs that could be served better if we took that money and put it in. But we can't, we want to be careful that we think a prerequisite, Pan-African Community Action, says that the prerequisite for abolishing and even defunding the police is to have community control of the police. That means to have the power to enact and implement the things that we say. That means hiring, firing police, deciding what their priorities and duties are, and then organizing, having ourselves organized in a way that we can have a community control board that decides these things, maybe split up into priorities and policies, and then others that deals with the day-to-day functions of the police. And then and that's what we're advocating. Some people who are pushing, some organizations pushing for community control, think that it should be done through council legislation or something like that. And we're not in disagreement. That's fine. People should be doing it the best way we know how. But the point is that we want community control over the police. We want to make a distinction here between community control of the police and community policing. Not the same thing, and people often use it interchangeably. This is another ploy from the PR departments of the state. Community policing, where you're collaborating with the police to enforce mass incarceration and those things. And then we're against community policing, community review boards and neighborhood watches. All of that stuff is collaboration with the settler colonial state. We're for the community having control of all of the things I mentioned. I wanted to just go back, bringing back COINTELPRO up to this time, current time. If you can notice, this is October 17th in Foreign Policy magazine. They've started a designation of identity, Black identity extremists back then, and many of us saw it as a successor to demonization and criminalization of our movements. And that's what this is all about, the Black identity extremists. And so it's an FBI counter, this is the FBI coming up with this bogus, designation recently, and we don't know how they're using it. And this is a clip from the designation. The FBI defines Black identity extremists as individuals who seek wholly or in part through unlawful acts of force or violence, which is ridiculous, in response to perceived racism, because you can only perceive it, and it doesn't really exist in the glorious America. You can only be perceiving it, and injustice in American society, and some do so in furtherance of establishing a separate Black homeland or autonomous Black social institutions, yada, yada. But anyway, they've made this such a thing that that they are criminalizing and falsely putting designations on people who are basically just fighting for our self-determination and our rights. Now, back to the community control of the police in DC, which what we're talking about is we're calling for a ballot initiative to realize the community control. So it means we're organizing the community. We have to be organized in order to really realize community control of the police, and basically decentralizing the police. A lot of people don't really know that the police are very centralized all the way up to the federal level. We hear about police departments on local levels, but even on the international level, they have international associations of police chiefs. U.S. based, that association is based in Arlington, Virginia. It trains police all around the world, and so the same paradigm that exists in the United States in which the police are used, it enforces neocolonialism and quote unquote law and order in other countries. But back to this, we're calling for a ballot initiative where we are organizing to not to get those powers that be to hand us something, community control or defund or anything, but that we're using the mechanisms of the institutions, the democratic institutions or mechanisms of the state to fight for things, fight for this. And even most important then, and this is the other part of that, most important is that we have to be organized to realize it. We have to organize community councils and different structures the community needs and the training community has to have in order to exercise community control of the police. It doesn't mean anything if we win a ballot initiative or get it granted by the city council, if in fact we aren't organized to realize or to exercise control. So often we have this exercise that we do in Pan-African Community Action in the community where we pose this question: what if you had the power? If you had your own force in the community that with their roles, what would their roles be in the community? What would you have them do? And often people come up with these remarkable things that that have nothing like the punitive type of things and that we see happening to us in our communities. And so we say that with community control of police, entire communities are empowered and free to imagine and re-envision the very nature of policing itself. So here we would have, and then that reimagination, that reimagining, and that reconstituting things based on what the community understands its needs to be would be so unrecognizable from what we currently see as police. We would have to be forced to change what the institution. We wouldn't even be able to call the police because it would just be, we would effectively be abolishing the police ourselves. This quote is really talking about, I'm not going to go through it because we've run out of time, more time than I want to get to, and I want to get to AFRICOM, is that talking about the violence in our community is something we have to address. The police don't do that. They even make it worse, and they always come after the fact, and so now we want to go to AFRICOM. AFRICOM is the militarization of the African continent. It stands for U.S. Africa Command. We see, anyway, it's the extension of policing, the militarization of the African continent, working with different militaries on the African continent. Before I get into that, I would like to show another quick video. Please indulge me. This one's quicker. And so this one's a little shorter, I mean.
Militarized police violence carried out against Black and other non-European colonized peoples domestically, and the brutal violence of the U.S. military and intelligence agencies abroad are two sides of the same white supremacist colonial capitalist coin. That is why for the Black Alliance for Peace, it is vital that the public understand this connection. The U.S.-made bombs bursting in air remind us that U.S. imperialism is still alive and well. The U.S. commitment to the concept of full-spectrum global dominance is carried out in many forms, including 11 command centers that are headquartered across the world. The U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM, puts most African states under the effective military control of the United States. The Indo-Pacific Command is the counterpart to AFRICOM in the Asia-Pacific, and is being used to direct military aggression towards China. 2 years after the end of the Second Imperialist War in 1945, the U.S. established the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Center in 1947, formerly known as the U.S. Pacific Command Center. Its area of responsibility encompasses about half the Earth's surface. The 36 nations that comprise the Asia-Pacific region are home to more than 50% of the world's population. The U.S. has 375,000 enlisted members of its Indo-Pacific Command, including 60% of its Navy ships, 55% of its armies, and 2/3 of its Marine Corps. In addition, with 85,000 forward deployed soldiers and a large amount of high-tech and new weaponry, the U.S. military has maintained its absolute supremacy in the Asia-Pacific over the years, while also continuing to seek new deployments, budgets, and resources, using the threat of China's and Russia's strategic rivalry as a justification. South Korea, Guam, Australia, Malaysia, and a host of other countries have strengthened military arrangements with the United States over the last decade. In 2007, the Bush administration announced the establishment of the U.S. African Command Structure.
We're going to Benin, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ghana, and Liberia. Each of these countries is blessed with natural beauty, vibrant culture, and an unmistakable spirit of energy and optimism. Africa in the 21st century is a continent of potential.
AFRICOM, that was then fully launched on October 1st, 2008. The U.S., which currently has the largest military budget in its history, spends nearly $2 billion per year to carry out imperialism in Africa. A study by the UN concluded that in the majority of cases, state action appears to be the primary factor finally pushing individuals into violent extremism in Africa. Of more than 500 former members of militant organizations interviewed for the report, 71% pointed to government action, including killing of a family member or friend, or arrest of a family member or friend, as the incident that prompted them to join a group. And the cycle continues. Drone attacks breed recruitment, which produces further terror attacks, which leave the states involved more dependent on U.S. military support. This is how the West creates the demand for AFRICOM. We must demand that the U.S. shut down AFRICOM and the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. No compromise, no retreat. No compromise, no retreat.
The independence of Ghana is not for innocent. Oh, yes. I can tell them that the good people of this country, overwhelming majority of people of this country, flatly and totally reject this attempt to send us back into colonialism. We will never be colonized again.
Militarized police violence.
Sorry about that. Okay, so let me I just have a couple more of these slides. So this is the, just a couple more slides. These are infographics. I don't really I actually can, this is the end of the presentation. AFRICOM is actually operating. There's either a military base or military to military relationship in 53 out of 54 African states, countries. And then I talked about the 1033 program earlier. Under Obama, the U.S. military presence in Africa increased by 1,900%, and the value of military equipment transferred to police increased by 2,400%. So we see AFRICOM in Africa and mirroring the U.S. policy or the domestic policy of policing in the United States. And obviously, this money could be funding a whole lot of stuff. In the pandemic, these were made before the pandemic. There's a whole lot of need, and then they're acting like the policymakers are acting like they don't know what to do in terms of the dire conditions that the people are facing, working class people. So that's my presentation. Sorry it took so long. I'd like to open it up now for any question and answer. Oh, I didn't mention the demands that we have. Black Alliance for Peace has the U.S. Out of Africa Shut Down AFRICOM campaign, and our demands are, I'll put them in the chat. Our demands are, and also a link where you can go to get more about our campaign. Demand the Congressional Black Caucus oppose AFRICOM and conduct hearings on AFRICOM's impact on the African continent. 2, the complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from Africa. 3, the demilitarization of the African continent. And 4, the closure of U.S. bases throughout the world. That is what we are calling for. And I'll put that in the chat. And thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, Netfa. All right, so now is the time for Q&A. If anyone has a question, I've auto-muted everyone to reduce sound feedback, but you should be able to unmute yourself. Could someone test that out? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So right now you can either send your question to Umar, the moderator, or just unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you so much.
So, do you know which country is not in that AFRICOM is not operating in? You said that was 53 out of 54.
Eritrea.
Oh, okay, cool. I was just wondering because that seemed like.
But these things have a way of being very. Things are changing. Things are changing in the Horn of Africa and with Eritrea. We hope that it stays that way, but. There's some signs of things that are not very disturbing, that are kind of concerning, but yeah, so.
Yeah, I know there's that fighting with in Ethiopia right now, and I want to say Eritrea has some involvement there, right? I don't know the details though.
Say that last part that you said.
Oh, I know there was.
I know you said about the fighting there, and then you said something else.
I thought I heard something about Eritrea being involved in that, but I'm not like certain. I haven't read too much on it.
I put, and someone asked about the COINTELPRO. I'm sorry, it's called COINTELPRO 101. COINTELPRO 101 is the name of that documentary. So the whole thing is about an hour long. I only showed about 10 minutes of it. But in terms of the Horn of Africa, there's this being propagated that Eritrea is involved in that, but the Tigrayan, the TPLF, which has been in power in Ethiopia for a long time until the new prime minister came into power, had been in dispute and warring with Eritrea for a long time, and they have been in border disputes because it's bordering Eritrea, and so right now it's not the accusations that Eritrea is involved are basically just TPLF, but that's a much complicated issue that I'd rather not talk about now. It's a topic for another thing, because I'm sure this will.
Understandable. Yeah, no. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. But I can, I'll put my email. I can send you resources about things that I might not be able to talk about right now. I don't want to shut conversations down, but yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was wondering if you have read Jay Sakai's book, Settlers.
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite get that.
I was wondering if you're familiar with Jay Sakai's book, Settlers.
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, I'd like to know, well, his argument is that the white working class in the United States has been completely bought up by the capitalist class, and basically it's complicit in the exploitation of the capitalist class and has no revolutionary potential at all. So I was just wondering what you think about that, and what you think that the role of the I guess the settler in settler colonial states, what the role of the settler population and the settler working class is in decolonization.
You said what has been brought off by the working class?
that the white working class has been bought up by the capitalist class.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I understand where that's coming from, and actually, I don't know the extreme terms of completely bought off, but I understand what it is. There is a history to that, and we can even see it with the support that Donald Trump gets. It's largely a white working class support, and that the white working class, there's a history of using racism and divisions to make people believe, one sort of embrace white privilege, and even to the detriment that they don't realize the commonality and common interests we have as workers. And so it's sort of propagated to them. And so I don't know if the word buying off, maybe, I'm not really sure, but I guess that's a way to think of it. But yeah, I definitely understand where that's coming from, and that there is work to be done there by probably other revolutionary white people to go in and have that and revolutionize that working class. But that's actually how the settler state maintains its control. That's part of the white supremacy and capitalism working together, the intersections of it and how it works.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I would say there's no hope in that. I would say that there's more to there's potential, and I think that what has to happen is that the most impacted, the most oppressed working classes, which are the non-white working classes, have to be in the lead of the struggle. That's the only way to safeguard, to create a society that doesn't result in white privilege.
Hey, I just wanted to, hey Netfa, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out here, being on here with all the back and forth with the emails. It's really nice to finally see you and hear some of your stuff. I've heard great things about you from numerous people. I was in the car, so I couldn't watch it, but I was listening to when you were playing the clip about the various African-American rights groups before the Civil Rights Act, and the idea of like radicalism. And it's all who you are talking to, right? About what is radical and what is not. It's like, well, the less you know about what is actually going on, of course, the more radical you're going to think that these movements are. So my question, I guess, is if you come across somebody who's like, oh, that's radical, that's way too much, like they don't need to work that hard at gaining rights or whatever, like, is there any way you can talk somebody down off of that ledge with like knowledge, or are those people usually just like too far into their own thinking to even try? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's hard to know who's a lost cause or not, but I think one of the things that we have to remember is that the like terms like radical and all that are made into caricatures by the media, and so when people think of radical, they're not thinking about the essence of what radical means. If we look at the society, and what's one thing I meant to get to and didn't really talk about was neoliberalism as the late stage capitalism that we're in, where neoliberalism is characterized by the austerity and privatization and the automation of things, an unsustainable system, the destruction of the planet. It increases wealth to a minority and increases deprivation to vast majorities of people. It's an unsustainable situation that if we, with more statistics and evidence, we can actually convince people of that, and have people realize that this is, we're in a race to the bottom with the people that are in power, and what's needed are radical measures. So we shouldn't run from radicalism. We need radicalism in order to save us. It's the only thing that will save us. And we could be duped into being told that we have time and things take time. We don't have a lot of time. Especially when we start factoring in the destruction of the planet and the environment into this. We need radical measures. And so that's the part that I would start with, maybe convincing, giving that to people, and maybe describing arming ourselves, but equipping ourselves with information and analysis that can get to that. There's a lots of studies, and even the Institute for Policy Studies does a lot on environment and even the militarism and that. There's a project, the National Priorities Project, that does a great research on those type of things. Then we also have the Climate Policy Project. And so when we have the statistical information, we have to add our own analysis to it, because I think people can have that and then still not embrace radical, what really should be radical measures, which means decolonization and emerging and getting rid of capitalism. We can't vote capitalism in, or think that some like small minority of folks within the duopoly, the Democratic and Republican Party, will emerge and bring us socialism. And it's only capitalism and socialism. There's no third way that people create. We need to look at in what the system states as rhetorical democracy and these kind of things, and build a movement. Most people are very favorable. There's studies. People are favorable to socialism right now. People have issues, problems with what's going on, and we need to tap into that. These are people. With that, we need to actually radically transform. We need to challenge this so-called sanctity of the Constitution. The Constitution is hundreds of years old. We need to get, the electoral process needs to be revamped. People they don't really argue about that moment. So we need to have grassroots organizing that starts on the local level, where people are building pockets of self-determination and survival programs, which we didn't get to. How do we survive? How do we share the limited resources that we have, amass them? How do we challenge the state with direct action and all that at the same time? How do we build a formidable alternative party to the Democratic and Republican parties? All of those are radical measures which are needed. And when people hear radical, and recoil, then that must mean that they don't have a handle on where we are in the state of things right now.
Hi, Netfa. This is Zara. How are you?
Hi, Zara.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was very informative. I was wondering if you could, this is a kind of a question that we've been having with a lot of the students in various sections about identity politics. And I would really like to hear your take on it as an activist, right? So we've kind of theoretically have been debating this. So identity politics is put out as something extremely progressive. So if you oppose identity politics, then you are by definition not progressive. And so I want to see whether you think identity politics is actually deterring and divisive, or is it really progressive from a sort of a grassroots activist perspective?
This is a great question. So identity, so there are political consequences or implications to the identity that we have. So we're looking at intersectionality, and then how different forms of oppression based on people's groups that they're in, and they includes class and maybe race and also in gender, and then how those things intersect in various ways. There's different forms of oppression that people compounded with a number of oppressed groups face a compounded oppression based on that. And we have to understand that and recognize that and have goals and analysis that alleviates that. This is looking at identity and the implications of identity through a revolutionary lens. But of course, also the adversaries of the people can also use identity politics. We're seeing it with the use of Kamala Harris. She's the vice president, supposed going to be, and she's a cop. She's the top cop. She called herself the top cop. She's a woman, Black woman, or even not just Black, but also East Asian woman, and that they're putting that up. And if you challenge that, then you must be sexist, or you must be sexist, racist, whatever. But we're not, so this is an example of how it can be used against us, and how it is used. Well, Barack Obama, which was a number of us call him the more effective evil. He went out a lesser evil. He was a more effective evil because he got away with a whole lot more things that George Bush and even Trump could not have gotten away with. He decimated an African country through NATO bombing, and it's just done so much. and just talks well. He's much more presentable, whatever, and just lulled the people, particularly African people, to, oh, we're getting ready. We're looking at the accomplishment of being really the president of imperialism is what you are. And we need to have someone, our children need to have role models to aspire to. We don't need to be aspiring to be the president of imperialism. That's not something we need to have. So, but the media does a great job of using that against the people. And even our movements can be duped into that. The first Black this, the first women that, a woman, the first LGBTQ person, and in Chicago, the mayor, Lightfoot. They have very private community control of police campaign in Chicago. I have to lift them up. Their experience, they have a mayor that is the adversary to the people. She's both Black, a woman, and queer. But you know, and so it means nothing. So we have to actually look at the systems of oppression and the forms of oppression. We have to be informed and embrace principles, not personalities and individuals. And first, neocolonialism, one of the tenets of neocolonialism, particularly how it works so well in Africa, is it has all the trappings, and this is how neocolonialism works. Neocolonialism uses identity politics, where you have all the trappings, this is the definition of neocolonialism, all the trappings of independence, but still your economy and your politics are controlled by the outside. And so, and by interest, a class interest contrary to your own. And so we have a lot of African, they got independence. The presidents are now, you're African or wherever, not just Africa. I'm African, so I refer to Africa. But the people are living in dire straits. We don't, the countries don't refine anything of their own. They ship out mass, cash crops to be refined and sold back to them as finished goods, or oil, or all the resources. And so identity politics, and we also refer to neocolonialism here in the United States as domestic neocolonialism, where we have a comprador class that serves to kind of quell and keep us in line, make us believe we've had progress. And it's, and so where there's representation does not equal progress. So anyway, that's my initial thoughts on that.
So I have a follow-on question because that was so brilliantly put. So you, obviously, for people that don't know Netfa, he's been doing this way, way before it became trendy or corporate. So he's been doing this line of work for decades. So can you kind of elaborate for us the difference between the corporate style approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and what you do on the ground?
Oh, wow. So corporate, when I hear corporate, we're talking about the capitalist entities and the creation of really, entities that are not human but have the rights of human beings, get the rights of human beings, particularly for-profit corporations, and that what they do, is really it's a form of neocolonialism. And when they talk about diversity, so you'll have more people, CEOs, or people in positions of having positions and titles inside an organization of different, oppressed groups, reflecting what we call minorities. I don't really like using that term, minority, but and that it's really, there was something that I just said before recently. So it's privilege and progress for individuals, but not privilege but it's not progress and liberation or for the masses of people. So on the ground, what we're doing is we're trying to organize the working class, particularly Black working class people, but also with the purview, we're internationalists as well. And we work with other peoples and other groups, focusing on our own. If liberation and self-determination means that we can't, there are no demons, no such things as demons and saviors. And corporate diversity will have you believe that the importance of things is individualistic. Individualism doesn't just operate in the sense of, a lot of people might think of it as people being selfish and going on for themselves and doing things. That's a part of it, but individualism also operates in a way that the preeminence of individual, that you're even deferring to other individuals, like the importance of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the president. We think about Donald Trump, but there's a system that made Donald Trump. There's it's not, he's not just, things aren't are just about individuals. Individuals cannot, they can create demons where we think that our problems are the result of one person or an individual, and they can also create saviors. And in other words, we think that our salvation, we need a leader and we need this person to come, when our salvation is the collective. And so that's what I mean. I don't know, your question. I might have got off the question a little bit, but I think that the difference between corporate diversity is it thrives on individualism. And individual examples and positions and whatnot. And what we're trying to do is build mass organization where everyone can participate, like participatory democracy, mass assemblies, and the most support. This doesn't have privilege, and people are able to weigh in on. Like, for example, in DC, we're talking about community control of the police. We're talking about having a component of structure of it will be a community control board. A civilian community control board that's randomly selected, people like a jury. People say, well, you're going to let anybody in? Well, we do want the most oppressed people impacted by the police to come in and be able to sit on this control board and make decisions about the control board, about what a policing look like, or really more accurately stated, public safety, community control over public safety versus community. And so that more accurately describes it. And so, yes, young blood on the corner who's got his pants down, who whatever, yeah, he gets to serve on the board. And and they get their whatever training we need or whatever. And we diversify, the participation in the self-determination process, or the liberation process, decolonization process, whereas corporate diversity means keeping the status quo and having reflected in it some people that look like you, and so you don't realize you're being oppressed.
Thank you. If I may, one final question. So yeah, my camera's not working, so that's why it's off. Yeah, so can you sort of, because we have a lot of students here, and obviously the fact that they're here and they're participating means that they have a great deal of interest in this. In terms of practical terms, like what could they do to implement some of these like high ideals? What kind of projects can they get involved with? What can they, even let's kind of make it very specific. So in terms of NOVA, so this particular student organization, what suggestions do you have for them for like hands-on implementation?
This is a very important question too. And I think one is that we have to realize that organization decides everything. We have to be organized, which means we have to be in an organization. If we're not working in collaboration with other people and learning and studying with other people, then we're not organized. And one of a key thing that we know we need is political education. We have to have political education. We have to politically educate ourselves and the people around us, popular education. So what you should build organizations that have as at least one component of popular education component, and that one of the most pressing things right now is also a component that deals with survival and mutual aid. And if you can actually study the history of survival and mutual aid and try to build things that extend beyond the campus, and also prepare your participation or your involvement to be after you graduate. So a lot of things with students, we have student organizations, and some of the things is that once you graduate, you're no longer a student, and the organization either dies or has new people, and the continuity is interrupted. But it's still important to be involved in student organizations, to do things on campus, and to make sure that your campus is a hub for radical thinking. Radical, understanding and learning. And also I don't see any reason why also I think people should take up, the students should take up campaigns like free, I think universal education, I think we need to have universal education. It shouldn't be a privilege, and that those should be some of the demands. You know, students are facing some serious oppressions and debt and whatnot that I think need to be addressed and are just not really. They're part of a big problem. But anyway, that's my answers, and then also try to do things that get you out of off the campus and into the community as students. You know, go and say we want to do this, we want to help a community, but also be sure do it, and when you do it, connect with community organizations. Don't just go in the community and think that you're going to do something for the community. You want to defer to connect with organizations and ask them, how can we be of assistance to you? What can we provide? What resource we have? And you might do an inventory or an audit of your resource, what you might have to offer, and then say it to them, here, this is what we have. What is the best use of this for you? Tell us what to do. And I think that's my answer to that.
You're muted.
Who, I'm
Thank
muted?
you. I have two questions-ish. The first one is, so our club talked about forming like a book discussion or book club. So do you have any suggested readings?
Oh, wow. A lot. I mean, I don't even know where to start with that one.
You talked about Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. Would that be one?
Oh yeah, that's one. I think everybody should read the Communist Manifesto. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. The Communist Manifestos, and it's not even that long, so read it and discuss it. The popular education and political education is essential to it, and I think nothing. And you said a book, like a study, you're studying together is what your idea is, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very important that people don't just like go read off and study. When you engage in discussions, you get so much more out of whatever it is. And it shouldn't just be books, it can be filmed and everything. So I think Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed is a good one that people should read. Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. The World in Africa by W.E.B. Du Bois. The Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert Allen is something our group is reading right now. I mean, there's so many things. Frantz Fanon stuff. Definitely read some Frantz Fanon. I don't even know. Just start Wretched of the Earth. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Just really quick, I want on record that now whenever I suggest a Marxist thing for the book club, it's backed up. So there we go.
That's right.
Seconded.
Oh, you know, I'm sorry, another one. And this might be a heavy right. Kwame Nkrumah wrote a book called, there's two books. He's written so many books. Kwame Nkrumah was the first president of independent Africa, but you know, I would recommend, he has a book called, people pronounce it different ways, Consciencism or Consciencism. And that's by Kwame Nkrumah, a must read. And then another one by him is Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism.
Is that based off of like Lenin's? Yeah, okay.
Yes. Imperialism, the next stage, or the imperialism, the next stage of capitalism, or something like that. How can I not remember that? It's a classic. But anyway, yeah, it's based off, but it's basically showing neocolonialism as a stage of imperialism, and you know, he really goes into it and how it works and the institutions and all that. It's it's must read.
All right, and then number two, with like Trump and rise of fascism or whatever, whatever constitutes for the left in the U.S. I know they got somewhat split on lesser evilism and whatnot. What are your takes on that?
Well, I think, you know, there's so when we think about, I think it's important to understand the conditions that give rise to fascism. I mean, Trump, it's like, you know, people, again, it goes back to this individualism, this focus on individuals and stuff. But where the neoliberal paradigm is heading, no matter who's in power, they're going to have to be more fascist. It's just no other way for them to maintain power. Because as wealth and things are concentrated, people more disenfranchised. And right now we see in the pandemic that people they're not even talking about on the media, but people are really suffering right now economically. We're not even just talking about the health part of it, which really, and it's interesting that they're even going to intensify this or triple this exploitation by, you notice there's a big focus on vaccine and, which I'm not against vaccines or anything. I think that, but countries, how does it account for the fact that countries like Cuba and China have gotten the thing under control without a vaccine? Yeah, they're working on vaccines, but they already had it under control. And so the problem is not the fact that there's no vaccine. They don't want to admit the problem is capitalism. This pandemic has exposed capitalism and the impotence of capitalism and meeting the fundamental needs of people. And even right now, they're I think this Republican-controlled Senate now is probably the Democrats' best wish, because now they can say, well, we had problems just like they were trying to do under Obama, but they forget that Obama had in the beginning had everything was Democrat and had no excuses, but they pretended they did, and people fell for it. But anyway, I think that we have to be ready for more intensification. We're seeing Democratic mayors and governors, backing up their police, so this is a police state they're talking about. And the march to war, and it's also an international fascism. The United States government and this US, EU, NATO axis of evil that's happening is the biggest threat to the planet right now. They're the biggest threat to the planet. I mean, and so they don't have anything to offer to people in terms of infrastructural development or production of products that people can use, they actually, they have to, in order to maximize profits, sometimes they have to get rid of jobs and get people out of work, which is a contradiction. It's really unsustainable. Sometimes you need people to have buying power or whatever to be consumers if you're so dependent on consumers, but people can't consume if they don't have no job. And so it's a really reactionary system that can only lead to fascism. And so when people keep focusing on Trump as the fascist and they're not looking at these broader systemic issues, they're deluding themselves big time.
I mean, Netfa, I couldn't agree more. Especially during pandemic, how we have a bunch of essential workers, and while we call them essential, we don't give any of the benefit of, they don't get health care, they don't get any extra pay for it. What they mean is not essential workers. What they mean is the job is essential, but the people that is working on it isn't essential.
They're expendable.
Do you have like a party or something?
A political party, you mean?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I belonged to the All African People's Revolutionary Party in my early days. But right now, I'm just in Pan-African Community Action and Black Alliance for Peace. I'm going to coordinate in PACA, and so we're not political parties. I've worked with other people, like the Green Party. I vote Green, when I can't. Sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes I don't vote, but,
Same.
But I voted Green. I can't, especially when it comes to the federal level, I just can't vote for no Democrat or Republican. They've never, I won't say never, but so far they always managed to get the corporate, imperialist, candidate in power. I mean, we've all seen how they even sabotaged Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders threw in the towel this time. They didn't have to sabotage him. He's like, oh, just gave it to him. I don't even understand. Now, I don't know if I would have. Maybe I would have voted. I don't know, just to see what he would do. But Bernie Sanders is an imperialist too. So, and just the fact that I think there's too much emphasis put on elections, because we really need to be building power on the ground and the local levels, and amassing and harnessing the resources, the mineral resources we have, taking control of workplaces and stuff like that. And then building upwards at the same time. And so we have to be doing those things. I think those things are more important challenge than the electoral challenge. And the electoral challenge, when we do engage in it, has to be anti-duopoly. It has to be anti these parties that are committed to white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is so much, appreciated. And I thank you for mentioning Cuban and following up with my relatives, how well they're doing in terms of the pandemic and how much harder it's been for them given the tightening of the U.S. embargo and all the criminal activities going on there. I wonder if we've been working here. I live here in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and I think around the states, there's a movement to try to, that's called Saving Lives. And in terms of the COVID-19, trying to create channels for Cuban scientists to exchange information with American scientists. I don't know if that is a plausible or possible way of at least start or keeping rolling on the conversation of social justice and not taking it from a political spectrum, but just approaching it as a human rights. What do you think about that idea? And I don't know if that is something that you'd like to approach in your talk. Thank you so much for doing this. Much appreciated. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. I'm familiar with the Saving Lives and Cuba solidarity work. I've been doing it for a long time. Very close. Been to Cuba several times, and I think it's very important. The exchanges of science. There actually are some exchanges going on between the Cuban scientists and those here. We don't get to hear about them enough, and they're not taken advantage of enough in terms of what they offer. I don't know, you're probably familiar with the treatment that the Cubans have developed that it actually lends itself to COVID-19, but they had it before the interferon alpha 2b. So they're using interferon, and so Cubans had remarkable breakthroughs, and I would attribute it to socialism, and in a strange way I'll explain later, and also to imperialism in a counterintuitive way in terms of their ability, their medical breakthroughs, not just their institutions of medicine and being able to provide for their own population and to also send doctors all around the world, and to help countries get things in line, and not just doctors, also things, disaster relief, is very great because they're right in the line of all these hurricanes, and they usually have very little casualties because they're just prepared. It's because socialism has created, that means that people are working together. They're working together to figure out how to mitigate the challenges that they all face. And the same thing in the health field. So they have doctors, people have access to doctors, but then also have the ability, because of their concern with putting people over profit, these breakthroughs in vaccines and treatments and things like that, that they also can't share because the global the pharmaceutical industry globally is a for-profit industry, and they're not going to have their stuff exploited by they'll take the countries, they'll have corporations who take the patents and whatnot. But these things are critical for the world. That the race to the bottom that I referred to is for us to learn from countries like Cuba, and even any country. We have to have a internationalism that lifts up cooperation versus competition. That's one thing about neoliberalism and capitalism. It's competitive. It wants to compete, and so it can control and whatnot. But we have to have. Thank you. We have to have cooperation, and Cuba offers that. It's a legitimately, I think Cuba is the most genuinely internationalist country, and its people genuinely in the world. And it doesn't mean that others aren't, but it's the most that demonstrates that most that selfless, let's give to other countries, let's do what we have, let's provide for our own people, than any other country in the world. And for us to overcome the challenges that we have, like this pandemic and like for other things, we need to tap into what this struggling country is doing. We need to use the when we do tap into it, those of us on the ground, as a way to fight this blockade. We refer to it a blockade, not it's an act of war, a total isolation of the island. An embargo is only part of the blockade. And we need to use expose the fact that this country has nothing to offer, has done nothing to anyone else but offer its humanity, to other countries, to other peoples. And it's obscene that the way the policies, it's criminal, the way the policies are against Cuba, trying to overthrow it. And this is also a bipartisan. It's a bipartisan thing. We heard a lot about Cuba. Obama opening up things and all that, but it's very clear. Obama and other people that follow that line are very clear. It's really them just trying to overthrow, undermine the Cuban Revolution in a different way. Let's overrun it with tourism and markets and all that kind of stuff, and maybe it'll fall, instead of isolating it like the other, the extreme, like Donald Trump's type, and not just him. He didn't come up with them, but those policies are. But we have to do two things. We have to support the people of Cuba and end the blockade, and we also have to make sure that the international cooperation that Cuba demonstrates is buttressed, and that we try to learn and take and not profit.
Benefit, it's a mutual
benefit from.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sorry. Am I being too long-winded? Sorry.
Oh no, please.
Perfect.
No. Thank you so much. I think some people are starting to leave.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining. If you will be leaving now, if you have any more questions, please go ahead. I was just gonna quickly plug in our organization, Episteme, and Netfa's Twitter. It's on the chat.
Well, thank you.
No worries.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Keep the fight going.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ashe.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
So we did have a question that was typed up.
Mm-hmm.
And they said Obama's statement was that defund the police as a slogan is damaging to the message and that it's too aggressive. Would it be better to frame it in a more lenient manner to appeal, sociologically speaking, to weaker minds?
Would it be better to appeal to use a different term than defund the police?
Yeah, I think it's asking if, like,
is Obama right?
Terms. Yeah, like, I guess in a more opportunistic way, should we use it to?
Well, we can't. I think the fact that Obama felt the need to comment on it means that there's some legitimacy to it. I tend to think that it's not strong enough. It's not. We don't want to defund the police. We won't just, they can actually play with the budget, finagle with it, and, take a little bit of money here and shift it. And then people will say, oh, we won. They defunded the police. We need decolonization. We need community control over public safety. When we remember, because Obama's not going to admit the fundamental role that the police play and the military play, is to contain and control the people, oppressed people, masses, for the benefit of the ruling class. And that's what the police are there for. So it's not about individual cops. It's not about training. It's not about not just about how much money the police have, but it's about the role that they play and this purpose that they serve. And that's what we reject. And we can't be soft about that. We got to be unequivocal about it. And we had to be like, that's what we say, when we abolish the police. And we say that the prerequisite to abolishing the police is community control over the police. They're not going to abolish it. They're not going to defund it. And so we have to struggle for something. We say community control of the police. Some people would say community control of the public safety. We don't need the police. They don't do anything but cause harm further harm and mass incarceration and killing people and all that. And it's not about individual cops. We need, liberation. And so, no, I don't, Obama's not right. And it's no surprise that he would hold his position because he's the president. He's been the president of imperialism. They need the police. He's a multi-millionaire now. and he's, so, and he still does the sheepdogging for the Democratic Party and the lulling I can't the word I'm trying to think of, the mind control over Black people. It shows that he took the time to talk about that, to mention that. It shows though where the movement is in terms of the police, the issue. I think the movement and those who are on the front line of this are doing the right thing, dealing with confronting the police as the front line of the system, and the most impactful, physically harmful to us. And shows that that's gaining some traction, and that he felt the need to come out there and say something about it. Thank you.
A follow-up to that is like, how do you realign the mentality of the masses to be willing to be on the same page as the more revolutionary movements that are currently in process, when the mentality of the masses is more conservative in comparison to the rest of the globe?
You mean the U.S. masses?
Yeah, I think they're asking. I think they're talking about false consciousness and how to break
maybe let's maybe not speculate on what they think. So can you read it again, Michael?
How do you realign the mentality of the masses to be willing to be on the same page as the more revolutionary movements that are currently in process?
Okay, I think I get it. And so, well, one, we got to be out there doing part of our revolutionary work has to be amongst the people, and it has to include political education and propaganda. And so a lot of times people think of propaganda as this negative thing, but it's basically using information to, achieve a certain result, or achieve get people to think a certain way. And there's nothing wrong with getting people to think in revolutionary, getting people to think about their own interests. And so we have to use use everything at our disposal, social media, all that. These are private entities, Facebook and all that. But right now they're so pervasive that we got to use them. They're even trying to control what people can put in a way that's not really good. They make it seem like they're trying to control Trump, but they want to control other. So we have to use that. When that fails, we got to go back to the age-old, create a physical flyer and put it on people's, in people's hands. We have to do what the Cubans refer to as the battle of ideas. We have to show people the legitimacy of what we're fighting for and the conditions that we face right now and where the road that we're headed for. I think that's how we have to do it. And what the person said, and what's important in their question, also shows that we have to show people, get people out of the geographically, looking at what's happening internationally. We have to educate people about what people are fighting. A lot of people don't know what's happening in India. They're not even talking about it on the corporate media, what's happening in the biggest strike. And then other places. And so why, and then what the United States, the fact that the United States always poses other countries as this threat to it, when in fact it's the opposite. The United States is a big threat to North Korea, but you would think it was the other way around. They're the ones that have military bases and ships and everything, off its coast on military exercises and talking, but you would think that North Korea, that's just one example, because they actually have the same posture against so many other countries. And so one thing is to educate people about imperialism. And we have to show people what the U.S. is doing to other countries around the world, and who are only just trying to just live like us.
I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So on your point on imperialism, there's a certain group of people, who I will not name, who believe or firmly believe that it's the USA's God-given duty to spread their imperialism across the globe. And I was wondering how we would, is it even possible to be able to change those people's minds through propaganda, or is it more like just accept the fact that certain people are going to be, I would say, blazingly patriotic no matter what we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, well, one, there will be a certain amount of people that are going to believe that. And it's always hard to tell. We have to just become much more sophisticated in what we do in terms of propagandizing. It also depends on organization. What we do as individuals cannot be more effective than what we could do, together with other groups and other people. What we can devise and the messaging that we have can be much more sophisticated when we collaborate with other people and do that. But no, and so it's hard to know what individuals will be affected and be transformed by what we might do. But we do know that they have bigger megaphone than us, and they are much more sophisticated in at psyops, psychological warfare operations. But and so there's always going to be some of those folks, and those are the ones they have to have some people who serve as police, to serve as soldiers, and not have any conscience about it, or at least believe that they're fighting some threat, non-existent threat. So we know that they're going to have to do that, but we also have to be vigilant and be keep up with what we're doing in a way that what we call demoralizes the enemy. We want to demoralize. We want to show that it's a morally bankrupt position. The United States, as a state, as a society, Americanism is bankrupt. Who are they to be, going around the world and telling people, it's an easy contradiction to expose, because this country spends trillions of dollars on defense and trying to figure out how to, help people live. I mean, what is that? And then when you do the numbers in terms of, even if we do this numbers, this recent emergency relief thing, it's not going to be a lot of money for anybody. They only gave $1,200 to people before they haven't given anybody anything, and they're about to go. I mean, how do people reconcile that? So, I'm sorry, did I curse? Oh, I saw you
No,
like that.
no.
I
I'm
didn't
just
know.
saying they just gave out once.
Yeah, once.
$1,200.
Yeah, and then they're fighting or pretending they're trying to figure out what to do. No, other countries don't go through that. It's because, and they're pretending that they have to figure out where the money's coming from and all that, or whatever. And they're fighting, the Democrats and Republicans are fighting. But when you raise up the military budget and how much is spent annually on the military, it's ridiculous. People should be able to see that, and not the military, and then not to mention, that's not even all the things, because imperialism includes more than the military interventions and all that. But yeah.
So to build off that, usually when you talk about bring up the military spending to people, the response will be usually to fearmonger about some other country, like either, like you said, China or North Korea, and that this is really the best option. That, like, the argument usually goes, this is like the best option we have as Americans to be the world hegemon. They just end up advocating for imperialism as long as we're the ones doing it. How would you respond to that argument that I usually face when I bring up military spending?
Well, I don't know if we're equipped with the specific things that the United States does to other countries, that's how we deal with it. In terms of, especially not just maybe not even just the more powerful countries like China and Russia, but the way the United States does in other places in terms of human rights, Venezuela, and Cuba. We just mentioned Cuba, Syria, bombing Syria and decimating Libya. Those kind of real hard fact stuff that really is hard to defend. They can't claim that they're fighting for these people if in fact they're destroying the people, and then the same thing, even with Russia and China, there's no, it's the United States is right on their doorstep with poised to, exercise some type of military threat. They're not over here. They don't extend that far. And so, and then also for us to study even what they say themselves in documents and things, the threat of China is an economic one to them, because they have nothing to offer economically to the rest of the world. And the system, the economic system is very inferior to what China is. And I'm not praising China or anything, it doesn't matter. It's just, it definitely is more superior to the US, and it's not posing the type of military threat that the threat of destruction that the United States poses. The United States is the biggest threat to the planet right now. And that, I don't know that, I mean, I'm just saying, and I guess I would have to back it up with some more empirical evidence, but it's not hard to find, you know, and we should fortify ourselves with the empirical evidence, so that when we're saying it, people are hard to, you know, people can't dismiss it.
I have a question regarding I don't know how to, I'm trying to figure out the best way to frame this. So I'm of Afghan heritage, and my family you know, escaped during the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, and seeked asylum in the US. And so when we found that America was invading Afghanistan shortly after 9/11, we were generally pretty confused because of the line of logic. And then a lot of things that people were saying and arguments that were conveyed to us was that they were basically akin to the noble savages argument, but like they're just savages that needed to be properly raised up from their terrible roots and become more of a modern democratic society. Outside of the fact that, I mean, the other argument was they're just a bunch of terrorists and we should kill them all. But so it was a mixture of both. And so when we heard that, it was really confusing because from our perspective in the 1980s and 1970s, Afghanistan was a pretty, in comparison to the rest of the Middle East, a relatively progressive place, with at least in Kabul. And so we were all pretty shook to hear that. And so my question is that how would you address the argument that someone would make of previously I'd asked about America's role in imperialism and spreading democracy, but I want to ask what about America's role in trying to educate countries of lesser stature, raising them up?
So one, the United States just has there's no credit, it shouldn't have no credibility. It's a settler colony. I mean, it has, you know, reservation, really basically concentration camps of indigenous people. You know, most of the people, so many people are poor, and just the police repression, the domestic practices of the United States disqualify it from being able to tell any other country what it needs to be doing. You know, and so, you know, and it's so disingenuous because it's really about, you know, cornering profits and resources and controlling the world. So whenever they do it, it's just you know, they're just lies. So anybody who, you know, believes in the lies and how to combat it, I basically look at here. Usually they'll probably not accept the things here too. I try to pick my arguments and not spend too much time beating a dead horse or anything. But you never know, like I said, who can be transformed. Sometimes they might not accept what you say in the moment that you're speaking with them, but it gives them something later on in their life experiences to couple with, and they might, you know, but you want, you know, obviously you don't want to spend too much time wasting your time with people. But, you know, when it comes to other countries, my first go-to, when it comes to how the United States is doing some benevolent thing in other countries, my first go-to is right here. Like, look what you got going on right here in the United States. You know, you cannot, you know, excuse it. You cannot explain that. You can't rationalize the conditions of the people unless you're trying to say that which they do. They try to say we're inferior and indigenous people aren't, Native Americans are inferior, whatever. But that's white supremacy. That's racism.
So a lot of the people, especially I'm gonna cite people like John Bolton and other types of imperialist mindsets. People tend to be realists, and they are seeking power or expanding the power of the United States through any means necessary, including like including through these imperialistic ventures that they tend to go by. I mean, hence why they're called war hawks in many cases. But would you? I guess like when treated as a subject in international relations, people would argue that realism is and the perspective of realists is a not necessarily just an alternative view, but also an effective perspective on the world stage. Um, would you disagree with that statement and think that realism is just objectively incorrect or just morally corrupt, and or like how would you perceive realism?
Well, I prefer people like the realists like Bolton and all them, because you know, as opposed to somebody who's going to talk, you know, about some other, you pretend that they're for something else. These are the adversaries of humanity. They're anti-people, they're anti the planet, and they make it very easy for us to identify them. And so I think it's not, you know, a realist is preferable to someone who's going to couch it with a whole bunch of other, you know, garbage, disingenuous platitudes, you know. So that's how I think about it. I don't waste my time doing it. You know, these are the enemies of humanity. So they're the ones that we need to, you know, be building our movement against, and not trying to convince them of anything or get anything from them or anything. We have to look at power as an essential dynamic. So who has power? The people in power are not people to be, the ruling class are not people to be deferred to and to convince, you know, like the slide I showed with Asada, you know, that's not how it's going to come. They have to, I mean, we have to shift power. We have to get power for ourselves, over ourselves. And so they're not, you know, there's no appealing to the moral character of these people because they don't have any morals. And so that's how I think of that. I mean, you know, if people who believe, yeah, I don't know.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I prefer people like a Bolton or even a Donald Trump than people who will pretend like a, you know, like a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. She's a cop, and then to try to pretend like they're for the people and they're really for the exact same thing. Well, not exact same thing, but the differences are insignificant.
So since I was just waiting to see, I paused generally to see if anyone else is going to ask a question, but if no one else is going to, then I'm going to get back in there. So in my family, I share a lot of views with you, just for clarification, and so it's been a fun journey so far. And but with my family, anytime that it turns into a situation where we want to discuss political views or even like worldview on or social issues and anything like that, my perception and my perspective tends to be perceived as zealotry, in a sense. And I was curious, because we're trying to inspire change, we're trying to make things fundamentally better, and then the people that we're trying to inspire the change, and especially in like, you know, where a lot of social problems tend to, or a lot of social issues tend to, socialization occurs in like the family, trying to spread it through that means still being perceived as a zealot in some sense. How do you handle those types of perspectives, and how do you make people understand that your perspective isn't zealotry? It's literally just you're trying that you want people to be in a better position than they are currently. Like from my perspective, it's clear, but you know, from other people's perspectives, it comes across as like anarchist in some cases.
Right. So one thing is to remember to not take it personal, and that the system spends a lot of energy and resources to make sure people think a certain way, and that's how it maintains itself. And so, you know, it's not so there's in some ways we have to have some understanding of the people who hold these views, because they're They're basically victims of the propaganda that we're bombarded with every day. And not take it personal. I know when it's the family level, it can be more, frustrating because it's your family and you want them to see things. And I think it's probably more so when it's when you're young, younger, you kind of, and that, but just just be an example. Just try to do what you can, be consistent with what you. Doesn't mean refraining from certain arguments. It just means not taking it personal or being emotional about it. And then over time, sometimes you'll see that people will change. And in fact, what happens is when you're consistent, sometimes what it takes for people to change is not only the things that we are imparting on people and what we're saying, but for them to also experience something else around down the line that confirms or validates what we've said. And so, and I've had that experience a lot of times, and then people, any family members or even friends will be like, you know what, you were right. Something happened and transpired that sort of proved what we've been saying. And then some people will just never come around. I think our task is to just, when we're doing what Cubans refer to as the battle of ideas, when we're doing that here within, what we're really trying to do, and we want to do is cast a wide net. And then we pull it in and we see what we come up with. Some people, we're not going to convince everybody. And that's going to be all right. We don't need to convince everybody. We just need, a critical mass. And then we do that by being consistent and true to our principles and patient, not personalizing what we said and not denigrating other people for what they believe, what they think, because there's reasons why they think that. None of us were born out of the womb conscious and knowing stuff. So that's what I was saying.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think I'm all out of questions. So if anyone else wants to take over.
It was almost 3. So we were on here for almost 2 hours, huh?
I actually
Good
have
2 hours.
I actually have one more thing that I wanted to bring up.
Okay, I want to have to make this the last question because I haven't eaten yet. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, obviously, if you need to go. You mentioned during your presentation about like the media being the most powerful, or like one of the most powerful forces in the world. I want to know if you think that we're dealing with like a different kind of thing now in the last 10 years since the rise of the internet.
Yes.
And how like an activist would respond to that, because it feels like in the movements we're seeing right now, there aren't leaders, and I don't know if that's just a factor of them being new, or I'm not plugged in enough to it, or that like something about the way that media is organized is like preventing these movements from gaining sort of like leadership in the same way. And I want to know what your opinion on that and how we should respond to this sort of new media environment.
That is interesting. I'm not quite sure of the media part. Well, definitely the first part of your question, yes, the social media and the emergence of the internet and everything has transformed things tremendously. And you said the last 10 years. The last 10 years, actually, it's been a little longer than that. Because, in terms of first introducing the internet, email, websites, all that, and now the social media has really taken things to another level. And in fact, when the social media first started, it was like some new means for people to interact with their friends. Now the powers that be have harnessed it, and even nonprofits and other organizations, and even social justice organizations, quite frankly, even on the left, have found ways to utilize social media and ways to push movements and things like that. The issue with it is we can't depend on it because these are private corporations that are invested in capitalism to the extent it can't be used to overthrow the global order, because then they'll just take it away from us if we have that. But they're also using it. And so it's really transformed, and it's made people I think the individualism and the preoccupation that a lot of us have with short messaging and short things, sometimes the complexity, not sometimes, but the complexity of what we're dealing with actually requires us to be able to, have a longer attention span and read more and dig more. But it, I think, induces the opposite in people. That's my opinion. You can see it in the latest forms of social media, Snapchat, these different things are things that are fleeting moments and don't lend themselves to a much more a thorough examination of the conditions we face. So we have to be careful about that. And these things are intentional. And social media and the concentration, the what's it called, I don't know, I guess psyops that Zuckerberg and all these people, they're actually involved in these things. I mean, intentionally doing, sort of figuring out how to. And there's a documentary I just saw on Netflix too that was really good about this too. But the other part of your question was, I'm sorry, can you repeat the other part? It was about.
So I don't know if this is just a matter of me. Yeah, like what do we what do we do in response to that? And I sort of was thinking that there was like a connection that like
about leaders,
like if because of this like lack of, because spaces have sort of moved online. I've always sort of been ambivalent to describing like social media as a space. It feels like there's a different, like, actual organizing is harder now because people go to these online quote unquote spaces, right?
Well, in some ways it's hard, but in some ways it's helped people mobilization. So maybe organizing, maybe not help that, but even, I don't know, it provides things. So it's a tool. And we have to be able, the tools can be used for, our advantage or not. It depends on who has the tool. And so but we do want to make sure we don't get, there's more people are, it's isolated people more and we're away from each other. But at the same time, some of the George Floyd uprisings, as we refer to them, and some of the other stuff that we're seeing was possible because of social media. They've used it. And the leadership part, I think there are movements now, even starting with the Occupy movement. I don't know if some of you remember the Occupy movement. It's been quite a while now. You were probably kids. But there is an emergence of the idea of not having a hierarchy of leadership, and that also for a number of reasons that you can attack the leadership of an organization or a movement, and then the movement will fall apart because it's dependent so much on this movement, on this leadership. And also the leadership, the idea that leadership can become corrupt or whatever, and it's not really doing what's in the best interest of the collective of the whole. And so that notion is what people in the Occupy movement, and what we're even seeing much more in the Black Lives Matter, and that where we're saying, well, there's a sort of a rejection of hierarchy, which is legitimate. I think it may go to some extremes to the point. And, I have respect for anarchy and anarchists, but I'm not an anarchist. And I believe that, we need to have the certain structures that we have to have in place, and that there's certain ways that the movement has to advance that I don't think are satisfied by anarchy and anarchism, although I respect it and I believe we have a lot in common in terms of socialism, in terms of a communist end and a rejection of the structure and the power structure and all that. But there's maybe some disagreements in that. But I think that there are naturally leaders are going to emerge in a movement. There's just different. There's like, what referred to as outstanding personality. I think it was Mao Zedong wrote about outstanding personalities in one of his things. I'm trying to remember which one it was. And that and just people are like that, and then there's people who, and then also there are people, there's, certain things are done in the advancement of actually carrying out stuff. And those are the people who are going to be, everyone can't be a spokesperson. Everyone can't be the person and so you have to, and then you can share that kind of stuff, but it can't be everyone still. So there's certain natural leadership that's a part of any movement, no matter what we say, that's always going to be there. And then there's also the formalized leadership in terms of structures, and people may be voted for or whatever. And then you can have lesser, you can make sure that that's not in a way that's detrimental to the collective, that kind of thing. But I think, they can't get rid of leadership of movements, and there's never a time where there's not it. We just may not be able to see it or recognize it. And then even with the movements in Occupy and all that, and I've, my experience, they've there was leadership in there. There were people, guiding things, and the movers and shakers, if you will, or whatever. And sometimes it wasn't always good, and it had a lot of things to be criticized about it, but there was always leadership, and we have to, I don't know if that answers your question. I hope so.
No, that answered my question.
I'm going to go now so I can get me some vittles.
Thank you. I'm with you. I haven't eaten yet, so it's been very educative last 2 hours. Thank you so much, Netfa.
Thank you all. It was very. I like the questions and the inspiration. Thank you all. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Right.
Thank you, everyone, for joining too. Have a good day.
Stay safe.